Under the green glow of the poker lamps, with whiskey in the air and armed men standing like statues against the wall, a desperate father made the most unforgivable bet of his life. He offered his daughter. She stood there in her training clothes, still smelling like the boxing gym, and watched the last illusion of family die in front of her. But the true tragedy had only just begun, because the man seated across from her, the cold, untouchable king of Las Vegas, did not see a prize. He saw a war already moving beneath the table, and she, standing in the middle of that silence, was about to become its most dangerous witness.
On the evening her father chose to use her as his last bargaining chip, the room descended into a silence so profound one could almost hear the cards conspiring. She had arrived directly from her workout, clad in a simple gray t-shirt, her hair disheveled. A discreet service elevator had delivered her into this ecosystem of predators, a chamber occupied by men whose wealth obviated the need for volume and whose lethality made it unnecessary. The air itself was a toxic cocktail of generational wealth, aged whiskey, and palpable dread. Green lamps cast an ethereal glow upon a solitary table where two armed sentinels stood watch, and presiding over it all was Sergio Lombardi, a name synonymous with the very heartbeat of Las Vegas. Sergio's influence was a web woven throughout the city's fabric. Casinos, labor unions, exclusive clubs, and a cadre of city councilmen whose loyalty could be summoned with a single phone call. It was whispered that he held title to one half of Vegas, while the other half simply remitted payment for its continued existence. He was younger than legend suggested, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark, swept-back hair and a flawlessly tailored black suit. He possessed an intense stillness that rendered every other man in the room a study in agitated motion. His expression was a neutral canvas, yet his cool, penetrating eyes absorbed every detail. Opposite him sat her father, Raymond Reyes, perspiration soaking through a shirt he could ill afford, his trembling hands betraying the entire narrative of his failure. Her father possessed a charm that felt like a comforting embrace just before the realization of being engulfed in flames. It was merely desperation with a practiced cadence. He had instructed her in reading cards before teaching her to navigate a street. By the age of 12, she could identify a false shuffle from across any room. At 14, she could discern a bluff from a man suppressing tears. By 16, she had learned the acidic, metallic scent of addiction. Now at 26, she typically screened his calls, but 40 minutes prior, an old pit boss had contacted her. "Retrieve him," he urged. "If you fail to come, he will not be leaving." And so she had fled the gym, her knuckles still wrapped, descending an elevator into the underworld. She arrived anticipating the sight of her father, inebriated, perhaps demoralized or even injured. What she did not anticipate was hearing his voice, raw with desperation, declare, "I have one thing left to wager." The dealer remained perfectly still. Her father dragged a hand across his face before pointing directly at her. "My daughter." The two words struck her with the force of a physical impact. Every head in the room pivoted in her direction. She was frozen a few feet from the door as an icy resolve crystallized deep within her. Her father's gaze remained fixed on Sergio, not on her. That was the most profound wound. He lacked the fortitude to even look at her as he bartered her away. "Maya," he announced. "She works surveillance, sharp as they come, knows this game better than anyone. If you win," he proposed, "she is yours until the debt is cleared." For a woman who had spent her life perfecting an impassive exterior, for one singular, surreal moment, she forgot the simple act of breathing. Then a laugh erupted from her, a sound that was jagged, grotesque, and steeped in disbelief. "You drunken, witless fool," she snarled, striding toward the table. I am not a commodity. I am not a timepiece. I am not an item to be tossed into a pot. Her father flinched, but only at the sheer volume of her voice. Shame was a foreign concept to him. Only fear remained. Fear was the singular authority to which his addiction still deferred. Sergio Lombardi simply leaned back, his expression immutable. He held her father's gaze for a protracted moment before his eyes finally shifted, settling on her. It was like standing before a locked door, only to realize the occupant within had already overheard every secret of one's life. Human beings have no place in a pot, Sergio stated finally, his voice a low, resonant force that seemed to contract the room's dimensions. Her father swallowed with difficulty. Then call the marker whatever you wish, he muttered. The deed to her mother's house is in my name. The credit line as well. I signed the marker against hers. Everything associated with her is on this table. Her heart felt as if it had ceased to beat. She stared at him, her vision narrowing until he was the only thing in focus. What marker? He would not meet her eyes, and that was all the answer she required. She turned to face Sergio. He forged a document. I am aware, Sergio answered, and those 3 words were infinitely more damning than any accusation. A chill cascaded across her skin. He knew. It stood to reason that a man of his stature never engaged in a blind hand. With the subtle lift of 2 fingers, one of his associates presented a slim leather folio. Sergio opened it deliberately, his eyes scanning the first page. Your father utilized your name to open a private medical line of credit 18 months ago, he explained, his gaze fixed on her, not the perpetrator. He then leveraged a secondary note against the house in North Las Vegas that belonged to your mother. Both were liquidated. Tonight, that instrument is on this table. She stared at her father. 18 months. The hospital invoice she had contested for 3 weeks. She had subsisted on instant ramen for 2 months to recover from that financial blow. She had sold her mother's bracelet merely to maintain electricity, and he had affixed her signature to a loan. Something inside her fractured, a clean, definitive break. Her father moistened his lips, attempting a faint smile that had deceived countless others. Mija, please listen. No. The word was flat, devoid of any emotional heat. She looked back at Sergio. If you were already aware of all this, why are we here? His eyes held hers. Because your father made a public proposition, he said, and 3 men in this room would acquire that paper before sunrise, should I decline. This prompted her to survey the faces around them. She identified Enzo Carbone at the table's far end, a man who managed gaming finance for Lombardi's casinos. She recalled seeing him once on a surveillance feed, striding through a secure area with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. He was handsome in a refined, predatory fashion with a gold timepiece and fingers that caressed his chips with an unsettling tenderness. He was observing her now with an intensity that made her skin prickle, and she understood that Sergio was not bluffing. Sergio tapped the folder. Your father cannot wager you, but he can forfeit every fraudulent claim he has over your life. If I call and win, I take ownership of the deed, the forged debt, the marker, and the authority to determine your whereabouts tonight. He will not approach you again without my express consent. Her father sat upright. And if I win, you cancel my debt to you. The tension in the room became acutely sharp. Even her father appeared taken aback by the proposition. Sergio's expression remained a cipher. I do not repeat my terms, Raymond. Her father glanced at his chips, then at her, and finally back at Sergio. Greed was the ultimate arbiter of his decisions. It always had been. Deal. She should have cried out, should have overturned the entire table. Instead, she remained motionless, the blood roaring in her ears, aware that some moments are too monstrous for tears and far too precarious for panic. The dealer began to distribute the hand. She drifted toward the table, as if drawn by an unseen force. It was not out of concern for her father's victory. He had relinquished any claim on her loyalty years ago. It was because the game itself felt corrupted. It required only 3 seconds for her to discern why. The dealer's thumb lingered a fraction of a second too long on the jack. The cut was excessively deep. And as the turn card was revealed, Enzo Carbone tapped his ring finger on the table once, an unmistakable signal. Her spine stiffened. The deck was compromised. The entire evening had been a carefully orchestrated performance. Sergio placed his wager with the same placid demeanor a man might use to set down a glass. Her father matched it, his hands shaking. The river card appeared. Relief and avarice washed over her father's face, the precise combination that renders men fools. He displayed his hand as if it were his deliverance. 2 pair. Sergio inspected the cards for less than a second before revealing his own. A flush. The room collectively held its breath. A sound escaped her father's throat, something primitive and animalistic. He threw himself backward, his chair toppling to the floor. "No," he hissed. "No, that is incorrect." "It is," she stated, the words emerging unbidden. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She stepped forward, indicating the cards on the felt. The deal was compromised. Enzo Carbone's lips curled into a slow, self-satisfied smile. Sergio's gaze shifted to her, more incisive this time. Her father stared at her, as if she were the one who had committed the betrayal. A man attempts to sell his own child and takes offense when she finally retaliates. "The house doesn't contest the river," an older player grumbled. She gave him no notice. The dealer dragged the cut, and the burn card was positioned high. That deck was arranged. Enzo spread one hand wide. "Are you making an accusation against the room, sweetheart?" She met his gaze directly. "I am accusing the one man who is smiling." The challenge caused 2 bodyguards to become tense. Sergio merely lifted a single finger, and they became statues once more. He turned to the dealer, examined the deck. The dealer's face went ashen, which was all the proof required. A second man intervened, fanned the cards, and located the notches within moments. Minuscule imperfections on the corners, completely imperceptible to an amateur eye. The room's entire dynamic inverted, becoming something far worse than merely tense. It was the absolute silence that precedes lethal action, as dangerous men calculate who will be targeted first. Her father, mired in a drunken panic, was oblivious to the fact he had nearly stepped into a fatal trap. But she was not. That card hand was never about his victory. It was a contrivance to embarrass Sergio Lombardi at a rigged table before a room of witnesses. And she had just broadcast it to everyone present. Enzo Carbone's smirk vanished. Then Sergio rose to his feet. She had been around powerful men her entire life, men who believed wealth could alter the laws of physics. None of them moved like Sergio Lombardi. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and the ambient temperature in the room plunged by 20 degrees. His gaze shifted from the compromised cards to Enzo, then to my father before it finally settled upon me. "You witnessed it from the threshold." The statement was an indictment, not an inquiry. "I did." "Good." With that single word, a world ended. He motioned to two figures against the wall. Relieve Raymond of his credentials, his timepiece, his keys, and any remnant of honor he carried in here. He departs with his life this evening only because she is present to observe it. In that instant, my father erupted, not just at me or Sergio, but at a phantom of the existence his addiction screamed he was still owed. He was swiftly intercepted. One of Sergio's men grounded him with an action so fluid one could scarcely register it as violence. A primal instinct compelled me one step back. My father lay gasping up the carpet, radiating the stench of fury and cheap bourbon. "Maya!" he choked out. "You will not depart with him!" I stared down at the wreckage he had become. For one searing second, I was 8 years old, clutching a plastic spelling trophy on our apartment steps, waiting for a man who had promised to be there. Then I was 11, seeing him trade my bicycle for a poker stake. Then 17, grasping that my mother had died with less morphine than she required, because he had pilfered the emergency funds en route to the hospital. I had been interring him in increments for my entire life. This was merely the first time his body occupied the grave. "I am not departing with you," I countered. Sergio's gaze lingered on me, a moment too long, its depths entirely opaque. Then, with a curt gesture toward the door, he commanded, "You are coming with me now." I remained motionless. Why? Because this game was a performance. Your father was the lure, and the architects of this spectacle are not yet finished with you. Across the room, the space once occupied by Enzo Carbone was now conspicuously vacant. That provided its own answer. I bent down, retrieving an object from the carpet amid scattered chips, and secured it in my pocket. A lone ace, its corner marred, the artifact of their deception. I rose and confronted the city's most formidable man. "A separate chamber," I stipulated. "A separate lock. No one will touch me without my consent. I require every document bearing my name tonight, and if you deceive me once, I will vanish." Something flickered in Sergio's expression. Not amusement, but perhaps a form of acknowledgement. Agreed. I followed him out, my heart hammering against my ribs as if to break them. The private office above the poker floor was vaster than my home, possessing a coldness the room below could not replicate. Glass walls offered a view of the Strip as if Las Vegas were a miniature city, illuminated for men like Sergio Lombardi to contemplate during sleepless nights. Veronica Hale, his counsel, was present with 3 binders and a tablet. A woman in her 40s, sharp as broken glass, she projected the aura of someone who could obliterate a mayor's career with a single call and still arrive for her dinner reservation on time. She advanced the documents across the table. I sat and began to read. By the 3rd page, a wave of nausea struck me. My father had entangled my name in a private medical liability, then a property lien on the modest house my mother had bequeathed to me. Both instruments were just legal enough to be binding, just corrupt enough to dismantle my future, and routed through a labyrinth of shell corporations designed to mire me in litigation for years, should I resist. I closed the folder gently. "When were you intending to inform me?" The question hung in the air, aimed at all of them, yet no one. "No later than tomorrow morning," Veronica stated. A dry, mirthless laugh escaped me. How profoundly considerate. Sergio stood by the window, hands pocketed, observing the city as if it were a costly but manageable issue. "Your father did not happen upon my table by accident," he said. My head snapped up to face him. He turned to meet my eyes. Someone required a game staged in public. Someone needed spectators, and someone was wagering that I would react impulsively when a drunken degenerate placed his own daughter on the table. Enzo, I refrain from making accusations without conclusive evidence. That was all the verification I required. I produced the ace from my pocket and placed it on the desk. Veronica was the first to inspect it. Where did you find this? On the floor, near the chips. After the final hand, Sergio approached, lifted the card, and tilted it into the light. And there it was, a minuscule tear near the edge, nearly imperceptible, his eyes locked with mine. You raid the board with more speed than most. It is a consequence of being raised among charlatans. Veronica methodically sealed the card within an evidence bag. Sergio studied me for a protracted moment before he spoke. These are your alternatives. 1. You depart now, and by dawn, Carbone's associates will file a lien on the house, immobilize your assets, and present a compelling argument to dangerous men that you purloined marked evidence from a private game. 2. You remain under my protection for 30 days. You assist me in identifying the insurgents within my own organization, and upon completion, every debt attached to your name is erased. I folded my arms. Protection? I echoed. Is that not the term men in your profession use for imprisonment when they wish to be polite? No. The denial was so swift, so absolute, it was unnerving. I met his gaze. He did not waver. Then delineate the conditions. You will be provided a room that no one can access without your permission. You will have a phone. You will receive a salary, as this will be your employment. You will have unrestricted access to all documents concerning you. You will be guarded, because tonight, a half-dozen men witnessed your father attempt to wager you, and then saw you unmask a fraudulent game. This transforms you into an asset for my adversaries and a liability for my allies. The stark honesty of his assessment was more jarring than any falsehood he could have offered. I looked to Veronica. And if I consent, I will require copies of everything, both digital and physical. Dot, she affirmed. I turned back to Sergio, and if I decline, he did not so much as blink. Then I will still prevent Carbone from taking you tonight, but tomorrow will become significantly more complex. And there it was. Not a menace, but a cold, immutable fact. I despised how much I had learned to rely on facts. She collapsed into the chair, the weight of her surrender suddenly absolute. Her terms were articulated with precision. 30 days, not 31. 30! And the nature of her labor would be her choice. He countered that her focus would be on matters of importance. This was not her question. A flicker at the edge of his mouth, nearly imperceptible, betrayed a reaction. He conceded she would have input. A private room. He noted this was already granted. She was reiterating, she explained, to convey the depth of her seriousness. He claimed to have understood her initially. His delivery of the line caused a tremor in her chest, a reaction she forced down. She acquiesced. 30 days. Then she would reclaim her home, her name, her existence. Sergio inclined his head. Valentina, he announced, would escort her. The woman who appeared was tall, her face a roadmap of scars, possessing a serenity born only from enduring dangerous men and their chaotic mandates. Valentina Russo appraised her, her gaze noting the tape beneath the cuffs, her stance on the balls of her feet before offering a minimal nod. It was not a gesture of welcome, but of evaluation, an honesty she valued more than a hollow greeting. As she was guided toward the elevator, she paused, turning back to Sergio with a final stipulation. He remained silent, waiting. Should she overhear any whispers that she was won in a card game, she would personally shatter the offender's nose. For the briefest moment, a flicker of genuine amusement crossed his features. If she encountered such a rumor, he noted, she would need to wait her turn. Her new quarters were located on the highest residential floor of Palazzo Nero, a suite larger than her childhood home and more silent than any part of Vegas ought to be. The bathroom had been pre-stocked with unscented products, the closet filled with clothing in her size, and a blade was placed in the dresser, precisely where a woman who never truly rests would first investigate. That final detail unsettled me, Valentina noticed. He instructed them not to insult you with childish sleepwear, and not to insult me by assuming I would need to disarm you, she clarified. I glanced at her. He expresses surprisingly thoughtful things for a man spoken of as if he were a force of nature. Valentina shrugged. Even tempests have their own predictable trajectories. Then she was gone. I let the shower run until it turned glacial and remained beneath its spray long after the residue of sweat, smoke, and the poker room had been cleansed. I enveloped myself in a hotel robe I could never have afforded and sat on the bed's edge, pressing my mother's silver ring into my palm until the hollow ache inside me solidified into something I could stand on. I did not weep. Here, then, is a protagonist fueled by pure, unrefined fury. There are no tears, no tremors of fear, only the volatile fumes of resolve. It is 3 a.m, and she gazes out at the Las Vegas Strip, a river of fire constructed upon deceit and ill-fated wagers. She understands this city was not founded on chance. It was erected on raw human hunger. Men arrive believing themselves to be the protagonists of their own epics, only to depart with empty pockets and secrets that will shadow them home. She comprehends this intimately. Her progenitor taught her to recognize desperation concealed behind a mask of confidence. It is then she hears a soft rap on the suite's door. Her hand flies to the knife she holds, a movement of pure conditioning. But it is only Valentina's voice from the other side. "And before you attempt to stab me," she says, her expression utterly impassive when the door opens, "you already had your hand on it." Then she pivots and departs, a savage economy of words. Our subject obtains perhaps 2 hours of rest. By 8 o'clock the following morning, she is installed deep within the command center of Palazzo Nero. Fortified with black coffee, she confronts a wall of monitors the size of a small apartment. This city does not worship saints. It venerates its cameras. They observe all, and in Vegas, every deception is granted a close-up in high definition. The room is clinically silent and cold, designed for obsessives who favor electronic surveillance over sunlight. Banks of analysts are in a state of deep focus, their headsets on, discerning nuances invisible to the untrained eye. And here lies the paradox. She feels an immediate sense of belonging. After a strenuous battle to construct a life outside the con, the very syntax of the underworld proves to be an innate part of her psyche. Valentina stands beside her as she reviews the previous night's surveillance. Following nearly 20 minutes of quiet observation, Valentina breaks the silence. "This is not your first time." "Monarch Queen on Fremont," she replies, her tone flat. "The Knightsbridge, minor leagues, only amateurs, counterfeit chips, and men who mistake card counting for a personality." Valentina's expression remains neutral. Why was this not disclosed to him? The question was never posed. A single affirming nod from Valentina serves as the unspoken reply. They re-examine the footage. its speed drastically reduced. The dealer's thumb makes an infinitesimal slip. The deck cut is fundamentally flawed. Enzo taps his ring against the table, the prearranged signal. Her father's gaze shifts to the right an instant before the final card is dealt, the archetypal tell of a man who believes his fortune is secured. She replays the sequence 6 times. Valentina's voice is low. Your father was aware. He was aware enough to anticipate a deliverance. Would he have offered you as a sacrifice for his own preservation? The inquiry was designed to inflict a wound, but she registers no emotional response. He has done so before. With that statement, any vestige of sympathy in the room evaporates. By midday, she has affixed 3 core truths to the board. The deck was compromised, and the rigging occurred on site. Enzo Carbone provided the signal, an action necessitating access to private rooms' secured card inventory. Within the entire Palazzo Nero, a mere 6 individuals possessed such clearance. Enzo was one naturally. The remaining 5 were either fiercely loyal to Sergio, deeply indebted to him, or were holdovers from his father's regime. It presented a tangled web of allegiances. At 1 in the afternoon, Sergio himself enters the surveillance room. No one makes a show of rising. It is not his way, but the atmosphere itself shifts. The rhythm of typing ceases. Men adjust their posture. Sergio approaches her directly without escort or preamble. What have you discovered? Not an inquiry into her well-being nor her rest. And strangely, this directness earns her respect. Your operation was breached from within, she states, her tone strictly professional. The deck was manipulated before it reached the table. Enzo initiated the signal. My father believed that hand represented his salvation. Sergio's gaze sweeps across the board. Believed? The architect of this scenario intended a performance, she clarifies. They sought either your catastrophic loss or my father's public demise, perhaps both. He scrutinizes the frame-by-frame analysis in silence. Then he inquires, and the reason for using Raymond? He is desperate, familiar, and naive. Men of his type are easily manipulated. They mistake a trap for an opportunity. At this, Sergio's focus shifts sharply to her. What? Your words suggest you have buried people. She holds his gaze unflinchingly. I buried my mother. Is that sufficient? A fleeting emotion crossed his eyes, gone before it could be identified. Proceed. And she complied. They worked without pause through the afternoon. She charted the entire ecosystem, the movement of chips, late-night markers, and cash flows through all of Sergio's establishments. She identified phantom deficits appearing across various accounts, minor enough to be overlooked, yet significant in aggregate. Someone was not merely fixing games. They were using the deception to mask a far larger-scale extraction of funds. As dusk painted the sky orange, she linked the trail from the Phantom Capital to a pair of loading docks and an understated club off Sahara known as the Velvet Room. Sergio stood directly behind her, absorbing her findings. His scent was a subtle mix of fresh linen, leather, and high-grade smoke, an aroma that never lingered as he was not the one who partook. You uncovered this in one day? He questioned. You engaged the correct daughter of the incorrect man. He was silent for a moment. Then, you should eat. Her immediate impulse was to dismiss him, but she then registered the profound emptiness in her stomach. As if summoned, Valentina materialized with a container of food. She glanced from Valentina to Sergio. This environment is disquieting. For the first time, Valentina allowed a faint smirk. You will acclimatize perfectly. 3 nights later, she would save Sergio Lombardi's life. long before determining her own opinion of the man. From the exterior, the velvet room was unremarkable. A tarnished gold sign and obscured windows. The interior presented a facade of plush velvet and covert negotiations, a sanctuary where political figures mingled with entertainers, and the purpose of an office with 2 locks was a question left unasked. A forensic accounting trail had led her to this very club and to a financial courier by the name of Cal Demico. Outwardly, her attire was one of professional restraint, but it concealed an internal armor of unyielding resolve as she mentally rehearsed every possible avenue of egress. Cal Demico arrives 15 minutes late, his form first captured as a specter in the mirror behind the bar. "That is our man," she breathes. Sergio remains perfectly still. Pocket left or right? Jacket interior. He's also telegraphing tension through his left shoulder. He is armed. Sergio's movement is a study in casual misdirection, a slow drift toward a rear corridor that she instinctively mirrors. Valentina peels away to the right flank. Rafe holds his position. The moment Cal reaches the kitchen entrance, recognition dawns, and a bloom of panic is visible in his eyes. He makes a move for the inside of his coat, but her gaze is drawn past him to a reflection from above. A figure on the mezzanine. A glint of a silver railing, a dark fabric, and the long, definitive barrel of a rifle aimed directly downward. "Get down!" she shouts. Her shoulder connects with Sergio's ribs, propelling him sideways as the report of the rifle tears through the club. Behind them, glass erupts. The music ceased. The screaming began. A second round impacted the pillar that had occupied the space of Sergio's head moments before. Rafe transformed into a human barricade for the patrons as Valentina discharged a single shot from the hallway, compelling the sniper to seek cover. Cal attempted to flee. Sergio moved to give chase. "Rafe is wounded," she stated sharply. Near the bar, Rafe was on one knee, a dark patch expanding across his jacket. Her training engaged. She moved across shattered glass, reached for napkins, then cursed and unfastened her own belt instead. The injury was high on his thigh, a fatal wound if unaddressed, but one she was equipped to manage. "Focus on me," she commanded Rafe. He winced. "Not quite my preference." "Be silent. That confirms you are conscious." She tightened the belt above the wound. He swore, this time with genuine pain. "Excellent. Anger is a tether to life." Sergio was present for a fraction of a second. "Can you transport him?" "I can," she affirmed. "Apprehend a man with the rifle." Their gazes met, and then he was gone. Valentina materialized at her side, weapon drawn. Emergency services are unreliable in this sector. The house physician is 4 minutes away. Then procure towels and a bottle for me. Valentina issued commands and staff moved with purpose. By the time the doctor arrived, her wrists were slick with blood. Rafe was still breathing. Once the situation stabilized, sniper neutralized, Cal Demico vanished. Club secured. She stood in a back corridor, washing away the blood. She was at the basin, scrubbing the blood from her hands in a way that felt uncomfortably cinematic. The water ran from crimson to clear, but then her hands began to tremble, and the source was not the carnage. It was the fact that she had physically moved the organization's leader, Sergio Lombardi, purely on reflex. For one brief moment, the sight of that rifle aimed at him had registered as something intensely personal, and she found that emotional response deeply unsettling. The door opened slowly. She did not react. "You displaced me before the trigger was pulled," Sergio observed. The faucet continued to run. "Correct. For what reason?" She gripped the edge of the sink, a single harsh laugh escaping her. Truly? You are asking this now? It is the only circumstance in which one receives an honest reply. She shut off the water and turned to face him. He had removed his jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and a dark smudge of another person's blood marked his cuff. In this proximity, he was stripped of that impenetrable poker room mystique. He seemed more solid somehow, more authentic in a manner that powerful men despise being witnessed. You desire the truth, she challenged, because had you perished tonight, this entire city would descend into chaos by sunrise. Your adversaries would dismantle everything you possess, and I would be caught in the resulting fallout. He simply observed her for a long moment. That is an incomplete narrative. It is. Then what is the remainder? She could have fabricated a response. Instead, she confessed, I recognize the atmosphere of a room just before a bullet finds the one individual everyone assumes is inconsequential. A subtle shift in his aura, almost imperceptible, signals a change. My father brought me to his games at 13, she reveals, her voice lowering. Not for the gamble, but for my perception, to identify the bluffs, the cheats, the men hiding their fortunes. She was consistently underestimated, a slight figure in worn-out shoes. One night, a desperate player drew a weapon, but he didn't point it at my father. He targeted the man who ran the table. The room fell into a deep hush, all eyes fixed on the spectacle of authority beginning to fracture. I learned a vital lesson then. A man's power is absolute only until another man proves it is not. The silence between them grew heavy with meaning. He reduces the space between them, not to menace her, but to alter the very climate of the room. And you proceeded with your plan. Don't force me to regret it. The corner of his mouth lifts in an expression that is not quite a smile. Too late, he murmurs. He reaches past her, procuring a fresh towel, and offers it. She merely gazes at it, then back at him. It takes a moment for her to recognize its purpose, to cleanse the blood that still stained her skin. She takes it, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. Her heart pounds with a fury that borders on anger. A full week passes before the kiss that nearly was is ever mentioned. By then, she was far more deeply enmeshed in Sergio Lombardi's world than she had ever intended. She observed that he functioned on a maximum of 4 hours of sleep. She witnessed how his silent, commanding presence caused powerful men to stammer, desperate to fill the void. His subordinates feared disappointing him more than they feared his wrath, a telling detail. His world was governed by precision and consequence, with no room for purposeless theatrics. The man operated by a strict code. His employees were forbidden from interfering with the women in his establishments. Thieves were dismissed, not brutalized, unless their actions turned violent. Any man who struck a woman in his casinos was quietly removed through a back exit and blacklisted from his network of shadow-owned venues. Women unable to manage themselves were provided a complimentary ride home with no ulterior motives and no liberties taken with their keys. This man was no savior. He was a monster governed by a strict moral framework. In a city like Vegas, this was a significant distinction. The further their investigation went, the more corruption they uncovered. Forged markers, rigged games, laundered funds, and clandestine shipments disguised as liquor deliveries. Enzo Carbone was the architect at the center of this intricate web of deceit. Every trail led to him, yet no one could get near enough for a decisive blow. Then, She saw it. The surveillance room was nearly vacant, close to midnight. The technicians were gone, leaving only the hum of machines and the scent of old coffee. Sergio was opposite her, immersed in a document, as she reviewed the same footage for the 20th time. Her focus was on her father's hand. Not the cards he held, but the hand itself. His tell when lying sober was a thumb pressed to his jaw, but intoxicated, the signal altered. A single firm tap of his ring finger against the table. Her gaze darted across the monitor. Enzo's hand, the identical gesture. Once. She shot upright as the entire deception crystallized in her mind. She gestured to the screen. "It's a signal!" Sergio was immediately at her side. Her father wasn't receiving tips. He was following instructions, aware the game was fixed. One tap signified he should stay in the hand. Two would have meant to fold. He was being methodically dismantled. Sergio stood over her, his nearness a palpable force. Enzo was deploying the very same signal. She accessed a recording from 2 days prior, a baccarat game at another casino. A dealer makes a subtle gesture. Enzo passes by the table. The ring finger taps. A player then makes an audacious wager against staggering odds and wins. Clip after clip revealed the identical pattern. Sergio observed the sequence in its entirety before he spoke. "He is signaling the players on my gaming floor." "Not only players," she corrected, the grim reality settling in. "Your dealers are involved as well." She sank back into her chair. "This is more than skimming. He is assembling a legion of indebted assets who believe their fortune was their own. And you discovered it because your father imparted this private language to you." The truth of his statement was a difficult acknowledgement. Yes. He regarded her for a long moment. "A useful man, your father," he finally stated, his tone devoid of warmth. The chair scraped against the floor as she spun to confront him. "Be careful," his expression sharpened, not with remorse, but with focus. He knew he had struck a nerve. "My father is a spineless coward who valued the tables above my mother and even above himself. The only useful thing he ever taught me was how to recognize a liar before they speak." The room grew still. Sergio's posture straightened. "You are correct," he conceded. The validation was entirely unexpected. He could have dismissed her. Most men of his stature would have, particularly with an audience. But he did not. His respect was almost more piercing than an insult. She rose, the room suddenly feeling claustrophobic. "I need some air." No one moved to stop her. She ascended the private staircase to the rooftop terrace and emerged into the desert night. A warm gust of wind met her, along with the panorama of Vegas that resembled an extravagant, feverish dream. The Strip was a brilliant artery of light below. The Bellagio fountains performed for the masses, a spectacle to erase the memory of their losses. Aircraft glided through the sky. Beyond the manufactured brilliance, the desert remained, vast and indifferent. Her hands clutched the railing as she fought to relax her jaw. A moment later, the door opened, as she knew it would. Sergio stepped onto the roof, shutting it gently. He maintained a respectful distance, a gesture she did not fail to register. "I do not apologize with any frequency," he began. She gazed at the cityscape. "That sounds less like an apology and more like a warning." After a pause, he said, "My remark was inappropriate." The frankness was almost disarming. Instead of laughing, she countered, "Do you believe I owe him some form of compassion because his weakness became my asset?" "No." His reply was quiet but firm. I believe pain and purpose can coexist within the same person. That does not make them one and the same. His words silenced her, for he was right, and she hated him for it. The wind blew strands of hair across her face. She pushed them back and began to speak. My mother worked 2 shifts cleaning hotel rooms. She would arrive home smelling of bleach and cloying perfume, yet would cook me eggs at midnight if I was still up. When she fell ill, she concealed it due to our lack of funds. When it became severe, there was supposed to be an emergency fund at home. That was her belief. He took a portion of it, just enough to lose and then deny it. She passed away 6 months later from natural causes, but I will never forget the act of counting the missing money in that envelope. She had never shared that full story with anyone. Not her trainer, who understood her rage was her motivation. Not her colleagues, who assumed she just despised gamblers. And certainly not the man who owned a significant portion of this city. And now, her. Sergio simply listened in complete silence. When she finished, he finally spoke. My mother dealt blackjack on the night shift long before I understood how loss can turn men into brutes. He continued. My father consumed half her earnings, gambled the remainder, and once pawned her wedding band for a debt he was certain he would win back with his next hand. She turned to face him. His expression was like stone, but his voice was completely exposed, sounding like old metal forged in fire and carried just beneath his skin for a lifetime. When your father spoke your name, he said lowly, I very nearly sent him through the table. A tightness formed in her chest. Then why did you not? She challenged. Because eliminating him at that moment would have given the true enemy precisely what he desired. The logic was as brutal as it was correct. He looked toward the city lights. So, I accepted the contract, he stated, and made certain everyone witnessed me accepting it, not you. She frowned. For what purpose? This time, his gaze locked with hers. This city can speculate about a woman with me, he said, but predators will not pursue what they perceive to be my property. That statement should have enraged her. Instead, it did something far more treacherous. She found herself believing him. She was struck by the realization that he wielded his own formidable reputation as a shield, warding off lesser predators who might otherwise have seen her as a prize. The silence that fell between them grew dense with unspoken meaning. Her senses became heightened to the wind, the sprawling metropolis, and the man who stood just within the precipice of touch. You truly don't claim what is not offered, she stated quietly. For a fraction of a second, his gaze dropped to her lips before returning to meet hers. No. A powerful tremor went through her chest. Every rational instinct warned her to withdraw, to remember she was on a rooftop with a figure who commanded fear and killers. Instead, she eliminated the space between them. While not making contact, her nearness was enough to shift the very air. If I initiate a kiss, she whispered, it cannot be dismissed as an act of gratitude. A subtle, dark smile touched his lips. In that case, be certain of your motive. And she was. That was the unsettling truth. She leaned forward and kissed him, fully prepared for him to recoil or show surprise. What she experienced was a display of restraint so absolute it was nearly undoing. There was no grasping, no claiming, no exploitation of the moment. He simply lifted a hand with ruinous slowness, offering her an exit, and held her neck as if she were porcelain. His kiss was a measured, warm, and devastatingly patient act. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was seized. In that moment, the entire world below them ceased to exist. The kiss was not an act of conquest, but a shared descent as she yielded to it. Her hand sought his collar, a clinical inquiry into whether a man like Sergio Lombardi possessed a mortal heart. It was there, a frantic, percussive rhythm that offered a thrill far more profound than it should have. He was the one to sever the connection, his forehead nearly resting on hers, his breath fractured for the first time she had ever witnessed. Maya. Her name was not an endearment, but a boundary he fought to uphold. She swallowed. "What is this?" "If we proceed," he stated, his voice a low frequency, "it will not be because a chamber of fools witnessed you being claimed like a prize." His principle required a moment to register. Then the pieces connected. The spectacle of the game, her father's betrayal, the public degradation. He was establishing that their connection would not be built upon such corrupted foundations. This understanding fractured something deep within her. "Good," she replied in a whisper, "because any man who presumes I am easily won fundamentally misunderstands me." This earned a rare smile from him, brief, potent, and unnervingly magnetic. "No," he conceded, "I imagine 'easy' has never been a word in your lexicon." Her world reoriented itself. She stepped back, suddenly starved for air. 3 days later, Enzo Carbone made his calculated move. A crate of marked decks was discovered, deliberately planted in her suite. They uncovered 2 envelopes of illicit cash concealed within a fabricated panel. A digital chip transfer was forged through a ghost account, its origin traced to a terminal linked to her profile. The frame-up was flawless, its perfection a deliberate insult. The subsequent meeting was a tribunal in one of Sergio's private rooms, with 12 men seated around a table radiating palpable tension. Valentina was a silent presence behind her. Sergio presided. 3 seats down, Enzo wore a mask of impeccable concern. Her instinct was to execute him where he sat. Instead, she stood stoic as one of Sergio's men presented the evidence and declared, "This appears to be an open and shut case." "Of course it does," she countered, her tone a blade of ice in the charged air. Here, we witnessed the ritual of public accusation, a theater of loyalty where the captain's narrowing eyes serve as the audience's judgment. Her defiance is the predictable, futile struggle against a foregone conclusion. Enzo's sigh is a masterful piece of stagecraft, casting her as a tragic disappointment. Her retort, "Your face," is a raw, powerless jab against an unassailable system. Sergio's fleeting reaction is a crack in the stoic mask, revealing the man beneath the calculating leader, the only thing preventing her complete unraveling. The scene is set not for justice, but for a meticulously orchestrated fall from grace. A hollow laugh escaped her, a sound of pure disbelief. In this pivotal moment, Sergio's silence is not an absence of words, but a declaration. After the intimacy of the rooftop, his public refusal to defend her is a profound psychological blow. When he finally rises, his movement commands the room's entire focus. His verdict, "Maya stays under guard," is delivered with the cold pragmatism of a leader managing an asset, not protecting a person. His averted gaze is the true wound, a confirmation of a political betrayal that cuts deeper than any overt hostility. Valentina's touch is a ghost of a warning, a pullback to the cold reality of survival strategy. She allowed Valentina to escort her, understanding that pride without a plan is a death sentence in this world. The opulent suite becomes a gilded cage, its luxury a mocking counterpoint to her imprisonment. Here, she confronts the stages of traumatic betrayal. First, the searing heat of rage, followed by the paralyzing chill of shock. And finally, the vacant echo of her own perceived foolishness. By the time Sergio appears, she has worn a path of frantic energy into the carpet. He arrives alone, his disheveled state suggesting a man stepping off the stage and into the confessional. "Just say what you came to say," she mandated, her voice devoid of warmth, "and then get the hell out." His offering of the knife is a complex symbol, a peace offering, a restoration of her agency, a tool for the very violence their world demands. His explanation reframes the public betrayal as a necessary performance. The bugged room, the watchful eyes, these are the elements of the paranoid reality they inhabit. His strategy was to feign division to ensnare Enzo. Her refusal to take the knife is a refusal to accept this cold logic. "Am I supposed to applaud?" she asked, articulating the human cost of his strategic calculus. The fury within her did not vanish. It simply transmuted into a colder, harder form. "Complicated," she said, mocking his rationale. "That would have been useful info before you left me hanging out to dry." She rejected his premise, the idea that personal violation could be justified by a greater good. For the first time, his own composure fractured, not into anger, but into a raw expression of immense pressure. "You think I don't know that?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Setting the knife between them, he named the bleak reality of their situation. "There are no clean moves left." That declaration silenced her, its truth an unwelcome weight. His gaze held an intensity that transcended mere anger. The conflict, he revealed, had escalated. Enzo had weaponized her past, taking her father from the very facility Sergio had placed him in. This detail adds another layer of moral ambiguity. Sergio's protection was also a form of control. "He'd have been dead in 48 hours, he stated, dismissing any notion of sentimentality. The note Enzo left was a classic piece of villainous theater, a summons designed to isolate and exploit her deepest vulnerabilities. "Bring the ace. Come alone." Her fingers tightened on the paper, the words a confirmation of her worst fears. "He knows I have it." She looked at Sergio, seeing the strategic dilemma laid bare. "You want me to just sit here while you set up an ambush?" His reply was simple. "I want you to not walk into one." The plea that followed, "Don't go without me," was a rare crack in his armor, an order softened into a request born of genuine fear. It was this vulnerability that almost broke her. Her averted gaze was her answer. The Old Star Motel, a graveyard of forgotten dreams on the edge of town, was the foreboding stage for her choice. And so, she went in alone. It was an inevitability, an act driven by the potent, irrational force of grief that often masquerades as courage. Enzo had read her correctly. Her thirst for agency would always trump adherence to a plan. She moved like a ghost, ditching her car, using the alleys. Her preparations were professional, the ace secured, a knife accessible, a burner phone inert in her pocket. She had discarded her real phone, dismissing Valentina's warning about a tracker as a hollow threat, a critical miscalculation born of arrogance. Valentina, it turned out, had not been bluffing. Inside room 11, the scene was one of pathetic ruin. Her father, bound to a chair, appeared a decade older, the physical evidence of his failure etched onto his face. His utterance of her name was met with a wall of ice. "Nope," she cut in, severing the moment. "You don't get to say my name." The room itself smelled of decay and stale failure. His attempt at an excuse was met with a sharp question. Which he? to which he could only offer a broken laugh, a bitter acknowledgement of his many betrayals. She simply waited for the truth. He finally met her gaze with the stark clarity of a man with no lies left to tell. The confession was chilling. Enzo had recruited him 2 months prior, leveraging his debts. His assigned role was simple. If his daughter began to uncover the pattern, he was to lead her into the trap. "You see too much," he whispered, a statement of fact. He remembered you from when you were just a kid. The trap was not for a player, but for a mind that could perceive the game itself. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "So you sold my eyes." His head fell in silent confirmation. "I was so sure Lombardi would never take that bet." And there it was. The core of his failure was not malice, but the pathetic miscalculation of a lifelong gambler. He had wagered his own daughter and lost. "You were wrong," she stated, the words flat and final. For a fleeting moment, she saw a ghost of the father she once knew. "I know," he choked out. She moved closer, ensuring he would hear the devastating truth. "The worst part isn't the debt or the papers or even you using me as a bargaining chip. It's that some stupid part of me still showed up to save you. And I absolutely hate myself for it." His expression crumbled as it should. From the doorway, a slow clap echoed, the sound of a predator admiring its work. Enzo Carbone leaned there, a portrait of dark satisfaction. As his men moved into formation, Maya instinctively used her father's chair as a shield. Enzo's gaze fixed on her. "You brought it. Smart." He analyzed her, not as a victim, but as a peer, the viper in a nice suit. His smile was a blade. "This is why I wanted you. Most people are blind to the con. You always saw it." She held her breath, a coiled spring of readiness. He advanced a single, deliberate step. "Give me the ace, I let him go." Her father's choked plea of "don't" was summarily ignored. "It is never just a card," she replied, a statement of principle in a world of expedience. "Too bad," Enzo sighed, and his men surged forward. In that instant, she acted, slamming the light switch and plunging the room into chaos. A gunshot, a scream. She moved through the darkness with lethal instinct, dropping low, shattering a knee, her blade finding flesh. It was a violent, desperate reclamation of control. A frustrated curse echoed in the dark. Another gunshot, and then the motel windows imploded inward, shattered not by bullets, but by the stunning force of flashbangs. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard screaming. "Valentina!" The wave of relief was so powerful, it nearly brought her to her knees. But another shot cracked the air, this one intimately close. Her father jolted. In the strobing aftermath, time seemed to freeze as a red bloom spread across his shirt. "No," she breathed. As Sergio's team flooded the room, Enzo was already scrambling toward a back window, Sergio was the last to enter, his gaze taking in the entire tableau of tragedy. Her father, the blood. "Carbone!" Valentina's shout from outside signaled the ongoing fight. Dropping to her knees, Maya saw the wound was catastrophic. She moved on pure instinct, her hand searching for the source, trying to apply pressure. But he caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly firm. A bloody smile touched his lips. "Don't, Maya," he rasped, his voice a wet rattle. A cough racked his body, seeming to pull the final, ugly truth from his lungs. "I loved the table more than anything," he gasped. "This is my final, ugliest truth," he confesses. "Worse than the money, your mother, or the child on the stairs. She thinks a single correct action might salvage everything. Tears carve paths down her cheeks. You forfeit the right to tell me this. I'm aware, he concedes, a wound deeper than the lead. You were never part of my con. You calculate, you endure. Wager on your own strength, Mija, not on men like me. His grasp slackens. She seizes it again. His gaze bypasses her, finding Sergio, who is already recalibrating. Enzo is still a threat, and for men of their ilk, crises arrive in battalions. His gaze finally lands on her, a moment of true recognition after years of neglect. My apologies, he breathes, and then extinguishes. She recalls no scream. Valentina confirmed there was none. She simply became a void of sound. That evening, Enzo vanished, dissolving into the motel's rural arteries. 2 of his men met a different fate. One expired in the parking area. The second confessed before dawn, revealing the entire scheme. Enzo's treachery wasn't mere theft, but the construction of a phantom empire, leveraging debt to orchestrate a takeover. By the time he challenged Sergio, he would already control a significant portion of the city's power. Herbie, there was a single casualty in a vast, lethal equation. The following day was spent in solitude at her mother's home, a stucco dwelling with a fractured drive. The askew porch light stood as a monument to a future that was now impossible. She wept on the kitchen floor, her back to the cold cabinetry, a pain that was both physical and existential. It was a grief for him, for her mother, for the squandered time, and for mistaking the act of survival for the state of being strong. Sergio remained outside, a sentinel in the driveway for nearly 2 hours, demonstrating a profound understanding few men possessed. He comprehended that safety can often be found in separation. Upon emerging, she found him against his car, waiting. A silent moment passed between them. She descended the stairs to face him directly. Were you certain I would appear? I was. Does your constant correctness ever become tedious? Occasionally. A smile felt appropriate, but she merely observed, he found honesty at the end. I despise the bullet that delivered it. Sergio studied her. In this town, truth is an indulgence, he stated, his tone less cynical than weary. A raw, solitary laugh broke from her. You have a peculiar method of providing comfort. I have a method of providing honesty. That singular truth was the key. She moved toward him, resting her forehead on his chest. Instantly his arms enveloped her, not with pressure or command, but with presence, a stable, unyielding mooring. In that cracked driveway, she disintegrated completely, the city's hum fading into nothing. He offered no false reassurances, no judgment on her father. He simply held her until her breathing returned. As she withdrew, he brushed away a tear. Return with me, he offered. She met his gaze directly. To the sanctuary or the battlefield? Both. The response was so quintessentially Sergio that she laughed. In that sound, her grief fractured, admitting a new resolve. Fear of returning had vanished, fear of his fortress, and fear of him. My time playing games by the rules of other men is over, she informed him. His focus sharpened. Excellent, he returned. This concludes in 3 days. He detailed the complete strategy that evening from a secluded lounge overlooking the casino, as the oblivious metropolis below wagered on. Unaware its true power, brokers were preparing for a final, violent hand. Enzo had constructed his theater of war, a high-stakes charity event at the Crescent Ballroom. The venue was one of Sergio's, populated by officials, financiers, and the city's aristocracy. It offered a veneer of legitimacy for a covert seizure of power. What appeared, as a display of dominance was, in fact, Enzo's initial salvo. His strategy involved disseminating compromising information to incite chaos and fracture Sergio's command structure, while seizing any opportunity to eliminate him. "He intends to manipulate the outcome," she stated. "Correct. And you will be present." "I will." She faced their reflections in the glass. "No," she amended. "I am participating." He became perfectly still. From the bar, Valentina radiated intense disapproval. Sergio's tone lowered. "Denied." Maya folded her arms. "The last time I was in such a game, I was the prize. This time I select my own position." His jaw tightened. "Maya, you require an expert in tells, someone fluent in the cards. You need a person who understands precisely how Enzo subverts the rules when his arrogance blinds him. I am that person, not your lieutenants, not a mercenary, me. Your ability is not in question. The exposure is." "I understand," she replied, "which is precisely what validates my position." From her post, Valentina uttered an Italian phrase, its tone a mixture of insubordination and solidarity. Sergio looked toward Valentina, who offered no reaction. He returned his focus to Maya. "A refusal from you will not prevent me from acting independently." His gaze intensified. "That ultimatum is more effective when your history doesn't confirm it." She inclined her head. "Precisely." A profound silence descended, the kind that precedes conflict. Then a sharp exhalation from Sergio, the sign of his concession in a debate he respected. "One position is yours," he stated. "Valentina controls the environment. 2 of my marksmen are positioned above, hidden from official security. You will be equipped with a microphone. If the situation deteriorates, speak the code, and it is over." "The code?" He paused. "Home." She could only stare, the magnitude of his choice not registering until he witnessed her expression shift entirely. The severe cast of his features eased for a fleeting moment. "You despise the word," he observed. "No," she answered, her voice unguarded. "That is the issue." He moved around the table, his proximity both unnerving and respectful of her space. "Then do not provide me cause for remorse." She raised her chin. "You behave as if you are not already aware I am the finest poor judgment you have had in years." An uncommon, shadowed smile graced his lips. "That," he affirmed. "I know." For 2 days, they prepared. Not for the game itself. Her skill was absolute. Valentina instructed her on security schematics and contingency protocols. A hobbled but determined Rafe taught her the art of moving through a crowd unseen. Throughout the process, Sergio remained a silent observer, his gaze a constant presence on her. On the final evening, with the ballroom secured, she discovered him alone in the vacant high-limit area, the origin of her ordeal. A solitary lamp illuminated the poker table and a pristine deck of cards. He occupied the very space from the night her father wagered her future. She entered, securing the door. "Is the table's immolation a symbolic act?" she inquired. "Or is that scheduled for later?" He looked at her. "I was contemplating a replacement felt." She nearly smiled. Her gaze fell on the vacant space where her father had sat. A sudden, spectral ache coursed through her, a fact Sergio registered instantly. Wordlessly, he occupied a nearby chair, not one of command, but of parody. His move was an invitation, not a claim of dominance. She sat opposite him. After a moment, he slid a folded document across the table. It was their initial contract bearing her name, her father's counterfeit signatures, and Sergio's own. She met his stare. Upon this operation's conclusion, he murmured, this is incinerated. Why this moment? Because should events falter tomorrow, you must not believe a paper in my safe held more weight than your own agency. A weighted quiet settled between them. Her fingertips grazed the document's edge without taking it. Why must you speak that way? In what manner? In a way that erases the fact that half the city fears you. He reclined, his stare unwavering. The portion that heeds my words is the portion I esteem. A brief laugh escaped her, then her expression sobered. Should I fall tomorrow, you will not follow, Sergio! The name, spoken with such intent, altered something in his demeanor. Her tone was firm. If that occurs, this must be known. The connection between us did not develop from your need for a tool. It grew because you never regarded me as a trophy. He remained completely motionless. He did not even blink. So she continued, the truth feeling liberating for the first time. I cannot predict our future post-Enzo. Perhaps there is none. Or perhaps a brief respite in our chaotic lives, but I am certain of its reality. For a sustained moment, the formidable facade of Sergio Lombardi seemed to dissolve. Rising, he circled the table and extended his hand to her, a simple gesture. She accepted and rose. He raised her hand, inverting it to press his lips against her wrist, directly over her pulse. When his eyes met hers again, their icy quality had thawed. Should tomorrow conclude poorly, he said gently, I will ignite this city before I allow them to have you. Her breathing faltered. That sentiment is profoundly dysfunctional. It is. A genuine, resigned smile appeared. As are you. The Crescent Ballroom was an illuminated prison, a tableau of crystal and muted florals. Here, dealers were phantoms, and officials feigned ignorance of the criminals at their side. Financiers manufactured amusement as wealth demands courtesy. The scene was opulent, costly, and vacant, a mirror of the city itself. She was dressed in black, not an ornamental gown, but tactical attire. Her hair was secured, her mother's ring, a stark presence. Valentina had insisted on an earpiece. She had declined. The microphone on her wrist would suffice. The evening's unspoken truth was a physical object concealed within the lining of her jacket. Sergio's entrance, 10 minutes past her own, was a tectonic event that altered the room's entire energy. His black tuxedo functioned not as attire, but as a form of modern armor. Male heads turned with involuntary swiftness. Women affected a deliberate indifference. The staccato of camera flashes met the permanence of a stone expression. Across the densely packed floor, his eyes found hers. The connection lasted but a second. It was all that was required. Enzo Carbone performed the role of the affable host with meticulous precision, a classic study in the pageantry of evil. He navigated the tables, his handshakes with officials a veneer for the venom that seasoned his every word. The final game began at 9:30. She claimed the unoccupied chair to Sergio's right, and the ambient noise of the crowd ceased. When the announcer spoke her name, the sound was an anomaly in the charged atmosphere. A subdued current of speculation passed through the attendees. A minority understood the subtext. The young woman from the infamous card game, now a supposed asset of Lombardi. She allowed the narrative to circulate. The evening's conclusion would provide its own correction. Enzo was positioned opposite her. A daring play, he murmured as the cards were distributed. A common remark from those whose hands betray a tremor. His smile was a bloodless line. In mourning, yet so defiant. Quite extraordinary. She arranged her chips. alive, yet I can perceive your nature more clearly than you can conceal it. The initial hands unfolded with textbook predictability. Enzo was operating by established rules. The dealer's motions were too fluid, his execution too flawless, a curated performance of fairness for the spectators. This perfection was in itself the tell. True professionals do not need to enact innocence, they simply operate. She discarded 2 minor pots, secured another, then folded a formidable hand purely to observe the table's dynamics. From 2 tables away, a gaming official maintained his watch. A pair of Sergio's men stood near the far wall, feigning a discussion about charitable donations. Valentina moved among the guests, a phantom in steel and heels. On the 7th hand, she perceived it. The anomaly was not in the dealer's hands, but within the discard tray. The edgeware on the burnt cards was inconsistent with the deck in play, a minute difference in sealant age or storage. The strategy was to introduce a compromised deck when the pot reached a critical mass. Her expression was an unreadable mask of neutrality. Sergio had yet to make a single play. He observed. She observed. Enzo secured 2 substantial pots, his posture relaxing into overconfidence. This was the precise psychological error she anticipated. Men of his type consistently misinterpret stillness as submission. On the 10th hand, she received 2 queens. A flicker of reaction crossed Enzo's face at her bet. The dealer's thumb then paused on the deck for a microsecond longer than necessary. That was the signal, the tell. The turn card was legitimate. The river card would be the fabrication. She understood this an instant before it occurred. "Hold!" Her voice cut through the room like a whip, causing half the occupants to startle. The dealer froze, the card arrested in his hand. Every gaze in the room pivoted toward her. Sergio betrayed no reaction. A faint smirk touched Enzo's lips. "Is there a complication?" "There is." "Indeed," she affirmed, rising with a sloop to deliberate grace. Her gaze traveled past him, landing on the commissioner, then sweeping over the silent crowd before locking onto the dealer. "That card is not from the deck with which we started." An acute silence descended upon the ballroom. The dealer swallowed audibly. "That's preposterous." "Is it?" She extended a hand toward the discarded cards. In an instant, Valentina was at her side, not as an obstruction, but as a guarantor of process. She retrieved the top burn card, angling it to capture the light. To the casual observer, the edge appears black. Her voice was incisive, compelling their focus. "It is not. It is blue-black, a subtle variation in the die, identical to the ace from the game 4 weeks ago, where my father was undone at a rigged table." The murmurs erupted into a wave of sound. Enzo's smirk vanished. She retrieved the preserved ace from her jacket. A collective gasp swept the room. Her eyes connected with Sergio's, and she saw a blaze of fierce pride that nearly broke her concentration. She placed the ace beside the burn card. "The notches are a perfect match," she announced. "The same edge work, the same doctored card stock. Enzo Carbone has been deploying compromised decks across the city to manufacture debt and blackmail victims with fraudulent losses." A commissioner surged to his feet. An investor rose with him. Enzo shoved his chair back violently. "This is mere theater." "No," she retorted. "This is mathematics growing tired of your presence." The dealer fled. Valentina intercepted and subdued him in fewer than 3 steps. At that moment, the room was plunged into absolute darkness. It was an expected contingency. The blackout and the screams were simultaneous. She dropped to the floor on pure instinct. A gunshot reverberated. Then, a second. From the core of the chaos came Sergio's commanding voice. "Secure this room!" Red emergency lights began to flash. Bodies scrambled. Guards shouted commands. A waiter fell in a spray of shattered glass. There was weeping. There was praying. Enzo had vanished. She wasted no time. She was already in motion. Service corridor, first left, maintenance stairwell. She possessed an intimate knowledge of the layout, having rehearsed her path 2 days prior under Valentina's exacting time trials. Her wrist communicator vibrated. Maya. It was Sergio. Position? North service stairs, she replied, breathless. Halt. Negative. The static crackled with his frustration. Then, roof access. He is making for the sign catwalk. She had already reached the same conclusion. She ascended the stairs, bursting through the rooftop door into the sweltering Las Vegas air, the scent of steel, and the drone of aged neon. The electric metropolis glittered beneath them. In the distance, Enzo clutched an injured arm, moving with the gun toward the massive palazzo sign scaling the building's facade. A narrow catwalk, no cover. The footing was precarious. Sergio emerged in the doorway just behind her. A gunshot sounded. He staggered. For that single suspended moment, her entire universe contracted. He sank to one knee by the wall, a hand clamped over his shoulder. Enzo's laugh was a raw, discordant sound. "Well, what have we here?" The scene unfolded in slow motion. The injury was not fatal. A shoulder wound, damaging but survivable, if they emerged from this. Enzo retreated onto the catwalk, his weapon trained on Sergio, but his gaze fixed on her. "What a city," he yelled above the wind. "Men constructed on chance, then they become incensed when the house cheats." House? She shifted her position, drawing his attention. "You were never the house? You were only a rat within the walls." His mouth contorted into a snarl. She flicked a glance at Sergio. He was upright again, unsteady, his shirt saturated with blood, his expression as hard as a diamond. Her focus returned to Enzo. "No," she said, her tone flat. "I am finishing what you began." He pivoted the gun toward her. It was the precise moment she had anticipated. In that fraction of a second, his concentration on Sergio wavered for a half beat. In that same instant, the catwalk groaned beneath him where corrosion had compromised a support. Men like Enzo invariably watch the face when they believe they are winning. It was another lesson from her father. She executed her move, not for the weapon, for the control box affixed to the sign. Seizing the maintenance bar at her feet, she shattered the emergency cutoff. The colossal palazzo sign went dark. The world was consumed by blackness. Enzo discharged his weapon blindly, the bullet creating sparks on the metal. She collided with him in a low, vicious tackle, her shoulder impacting his midsection with a force honed by a mentor who used language no lady should ever repeat. She invoked every single word. The gun skittered across the catwalk. Enzo's hand seized her jacket as they slammed into the railing. For one terrifying moment, there was only the wind, the metal, and the unending chasm of city lights below. His elbow struck her ribs. Pain flared behind her eyes. She drove the bar up beneath his chin, propelled by the accumulated rage she had contained since her father had spoken her name as if it were just another liability. His grip weakened. She wrenched herself free. As he lunged for the weapon, Sergio fired. The report tore through the wind and the darkness. Enzo froze, looking down at the crimson spreading across his chest, as if in disbelief that his luck had finally expired. He swayed once, then a second time, before pitching over the railing and into the void. The subsequent silence on the roof was so absolute it was deafening. Her legs failed her. She collapsed onto the catwalk, trembling, staring at the empty space where Enzo had been. Sergio was there instantly, his own arm a ruin. His hand cupped the back of her head, a solid, warm, grounding presence. "Look at me," she complied. The city lights blurred through her tears. "Are you present with me?" "Yes." "Good." Then the entirety of the adrenaline evacuated her system at once, and she found herself falling toward him before she consciously moved. He guided her off the catwalk, across the roof, and back to the service area. Valentina met them with a medic team and a single raised eyebrow that communicated an entire monologue. "I explicitly told you so. Thank God you are alive. And if you expire from blood loss now, I will be profoundly irritated." Sergio declined all medical attention until she was assessed. She refused to let them treat her until he was. Valentina threatened to sedate them both. Rafe, pale but conscious and limping with surprising speed, called them a pair of intractable idiots. The hospital was a premier facility, so costly its walls were likely under non-disclosure agreements. Sergio's shoulder was sutured. Her ribs were severely bruised, one nearly fractured, and her hands were savaged. But they had survived, a state that felt entirely surreal. By morning, the narrative had swept through the influential circles of Vegas. Enzo was gone, his corrupt enterprise dismantled, and the commissioner initiated a public investigation. 3 councilmen abruptly took vacations. 2 competing captains swore fealty to Lombardi before sunrise. Half the city claimed foresight, the other half feigned ignorance of their connection to Carbone. Las Vegas offers no apologies, it simply resets the board. A week later, her father's toxic arrangements were nullified. The casino was hers, the medical debts evaporated, her finances were released. 2 creditors were persuaded to forget her number. Veronica delivered the final paperwork with professional detachment, along with a bottle of absurdly priced champagne. Maya ignored it. She understood too well the false happiness that comes from a bottle. She was alone in the desolate high-stakes poker room on the 8th night post-upheaval when Sergio entered. The same low-hanging green lights illuminated the same polished table, but the room's essence had changed. The ghosts were gone, leaving only history. He closed the door, his approach measured. His shoulder was healing, the sutures removed. He wore a dark suit without a tie, his collar open, less a legend and more a man, a transformation that made him infinitely more dangerous. He held a silver lighter. He placed it on the table. Beside it, he laid out the folded contract from their first encounter, the property deed, the final IOU, and the ace of spades. She regarded the collection of artifacts for a long moment. He flicked the lighter open, its flame dancing in the shadows, and then slid it toward her. The ritual was clear. She took the contract first, touching it to the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the signatures of her bondage dissolving into ash. Next, she burned the deed's copy, a symbolic act for a prize hard won. Then came the last note of debt. Finally, she held the ace for a long while before offering it to the flame. As the last spark died, the entire room seemed to breathe again. Sergio's eyes locked onto hers, breaking the long silence. "I won the hand, Maya." Her gaze met his, understanding the unspoken codicil. "But I never won you." That silent admission struck her with physical force. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Then she rose, circled the table, and stood directly before him. "No," she said softly. "You didn't." A muscle in his jaw tightened. The old vulnerability of a man whose immense power could acquire cities but never anything given freely. She placed a hand on his shirt, directly over the heart she had sought once before. "You earned me," she stated. "That's a different currency." He became utterly still. His hand rose to her face, his thumb grazing her cheek as if to confirm her existence. Maya. Her name was an answer to a question he had carried for a lifetime. A faint smile touched her lips. "You know, the city's narrative is incorrect. They say Sergio Lombardi won me in a game of poker." A smirk formed on his lips. "Did he?" She closed the final space between them. "No," she said. "He won back the pieces of me my father discarded, and then he was wise enough to wait while I put myself back together." That truth shattered his composure. He kissed her, not with force, but with the reverence of a man who had just found the one thing for which control was worth losing. There was no performance, no urgency, only a devastating private understanding. Her hand went to his neck as his arm secured her waist, mindful of her injuries. The table, the city, the entire drama. It all still existed. It simply no longer mattered. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now I keep the house." "Good. I keep my name." "Also good. And I am assuming control of integrity for your casinos with a contract empowering me to fire anyone who views me as decor." A deep, genuine laugh escaped him, a sound seldom heard. "Done. And when we disagree, as we will, you will not invoke rank, and I will not resort to projectiles unless it is absolutely necessary." He gave the term serious thought. "Define absolutely necessary." She laughed against his lips, then met his gaze directly. "The last time I stood in this room, I believed my life was irrevocably over." His expression darkened with the memory. "That should never have occurred." "No," she affirmed, "but it did. And I am done allowing the worst night of my life to dictate my entire story." She took his hand, leading him away from the table, toward the waiting city of lies and broken contracts. Las Vegas is a city that thrives on telling its own tales. The popular version whispers that her father offered her as a wager, and Sergio Lombardi, the sovereign who owned half the strip, simply collected his winnings. But the city can have its stories. Only the two of them will ever know the true nature of the transaction. On the night her father attempted to lose her, she wasn't won by anyone. Instead, she became the one thing in that town that could never be gambled again.
Life lesson: a person begins to heal the moment they stop letting their worst night narrate their entire life. In another telling, Maya would have been defined forever by that room, by the whiskey-thick air, the hush of cards sliding over felt, the unbearable humiliation of hearing her father offer her life to strangers like a debt note. The scene has all the machinery of tragedy. The lamps burn low, the men at the table sit like judges, her father trembles in borrowed clothes. Sergio watches with the stillness of a man who has seen too much weakness to be surprised by another display of it, and in the center of that terrible theater stands Maya, breathing through the moment her old life dies. But the real emotional weight of her story is not in the betrayal itself, it is in what follows. It is in every moment after, when she has every reason to collapse into bitterness and yet chooses again and again to become more exacting instead of more hollow. She does not deny grief. She carries it like a blade hidden beneath tailored fabric. She does not forget her mother, or the stoop, or the spelling bee, or the stolen hospital money. She remembers all of it. That memory does not soften her, it clarifies her. Then comes the strange, dangerous tenderness of Sergio Lombardi, not romance as fantasy, but as contrast. He is a man built from the same brutal city, yet he understands something rare. The protection without permission is just another cage. So the story lets silence do what speeches cannot. A room with a separate lock, a knife left where she would look for one, a kiss that waits for her choice. In cinematic terms, these are not small gestures. They are reversals of narrative gravity. For the first time, Maya is not being used as a piece on someone else's board. She is being seen as the only one allowed to move herself. That is why the ending lands. When she burns the papers, the act is not legal housekeeping. It is symbolic resurrection. Fire consumes the contract, the debt, the fraudulent story imposed on her life. Ash replaces authorship. And standing there, in that same room where she was once nearly reduced to collateral, she reclaims the right to define herself. The lesson is painfully simple and therefore powerful. The ugliest chapter of a life is not automatically its final meaning. Trauma may mark a person, but it does not own the camera forever. Healing begins when someone dares to say, "That happened, it scarred me, it changed me," but it does not get to tell the whole story.